So this is the final session in our challenging behaviour workshop. In the previous sessions, you'll have spent quite a lot of time thinking about understanding challenging behaviour, why does it happen, and then learning some really helpful proactive strategies to put in place. So now we're going to have a little think about when things go wrong. What can you do in that crisis? So this is me again, by way of an introduction. I met you for the first session, and you've got me again today. It's Tracy. So we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about what we can do in a crisis to conclude these workshops. We're going to think about the arousal or assault cycle, as it's sometimes described, and how an understanding of that can really help us think about how we manage a crisis. We're going to think about what we can do, so consistency as being really essential, and then developing our own safety plan, so coming up with our own way of dealing with things when they get very tricky. So like I said, we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about this. This is really helpful to understand what's going on for our child when they're experiencing a meltdown, and therefore how we respond with that real understanding of what's going on. So if you look there at that diagram, we start with the trigger phase. So you'll have spent some time thinking about the triggers, the specific triggers for your child. What is it that's going on in the environment, or that they're being asked to do, or that's happening around, that can really trigger an adverse response like that? When that trigger happens, we then move into that escalation phase. So you can see a sharp incline in terms of the child's challenging, aggressive or violent behaviours during that time. And then you're pretty much in crisis. You're in that crisis phase. Following that crisis, and what we're going to look to discuss further, is that during that time, there's not a lot that you can do other than keep your child safe and keep yourselves safe at that time, and we'll see why that's the case. We then move into this recovery phase. And the model tells us actually from that crisis until a full recovery, we're possibly talking 90 minutes, so it really is a long time. And that recovery phase is a lot more gradual than what it was when it escalated. And there's a potential there, so the adrenaline's still going, the child's still highly agitated, so there's plenty of potential there for more assaults or more aggressive or challenging behaviours to happen. And then the post-crisis depression phase. So actually, you can see, if you look down to the bottom of the child's baseline behaviours, they dip below that point in terms of their mood and their presentation. So it's really helpful to consider that, but also to think about it in conjunction with this kind of what's going on in terms of communication at this time. So going back again to that trigger and that escalation, and there you can see the crisis and then the recovery. Within that, as I mentioned earlier, we've got loads of adrenaline going on. The child's heart rate is beating faster. There's so much going on for them. And yet, if you look at the opposite of that, really, in terms of their ability to reason, make a judgment, a choice, a decision, even an ability to be able to listen and hear and communicate, that is completely reduced at the point of when they're in crisis. And that's why we'll often say at that point there's very little you can do to change the situation or make something different happen. And your focus needs to be on keeping your child safe and yourself safe at that point. And in terms of that decision making, that reasoning and ability around communication, our child's abilities in that area are also reduced at that point, and so are ours. Because when our child's escalating and there's that adrenaline, the heart rate, that's going on for us as well. So our ability to make a good decision at that point is also reduced. And I'm sure that sounds really, really familiar to you. But it was really important to kind of bear that in mind in terms of what do we do in a crisis, and recognise that our ability to make choices and to communicate with our child is reduced at that point. So what can we do? We know it's really can be helpful to have a low stimulus area in the house where you can go to when meltdowns happen. So what we're doing there is teaching your child what to do when they're not coping. We all kind of learn that at some point. It's really helpful to label emotions and what you intend to do. So if we feed back to our child, oh, Joe, you're angry, Joe's angry, Joe needs some quiet time. And to explain that with really minimal language in a way that's very clear. It's important to stay with your child or very close by, whatever feels safe in that regard, and to make it absolutely clear we're not ignoring our child, we're just ignoring the behaviour. And of course, like we said, to ensure that the child and others around are safe. Reduce all language. Don't use complicated words or sentences, and avoid placing any other further demands on your child or anything that they might interpret as a demand as well. That's really important, keeping language to a minimum at that point. Consistency. Of course, that is really important, really vital. Remember what you'll have learnt in the previous sessions about giving into behaviour. Even if it's only now and then, the child learns what level to push things to. So they also learn about who they can push it with and who they can't. And I'm sure you'll have had experience of this, or you've heard accounts of this from school, that children do recognise who has a different approach, or who will respond differently to them. Such inconsistent approaches to behaviour can be unsettling, and it becomes hard for the child to predict. So let's imagine, Dad, sometimes he lets me do this, but not at other times. So at that point, it's really unpredictable and uncertain, and children don't know what to expect. But if everybody's sticking to the same boundaries, the same routines and structure, the world becomes a lot more predictable, and that's reassuring. And we know most children thrive off boundaries, routine and predictability. I wanted to briefly talk about, I suppose, an example of a safety plan, really. In the previous sessions, the focus has all been on those proactive strategies. So the things that we can change in the environment, the things we can do differently, the ways we can change our communication so our child's needs can be better met. We've also thought about ideas around modelling behaviour, rewarding the desired behaviours, improving communication skills and teaching new skills. But like I've previously mentioned, if we are in that crisis, and we've done everything in terms of those green strategies, those amber strategies, which mean we're looking at the triggers and what's likely to occur, when we've done everything we can in that regard, we do need to have a positive behaviour support plan for those crisis situations. So there's a brief example there. It's not very detailed, but it's thinking about what is the child's difficult situation, what can trigger these behaviours, and what can we do at that difficult time. And as you can see there, it clearly says that trying to reason or use boundaries at this point won't work. If those green and amber strategies haven't worked, then we have to think solely about keeping everybody safe. So there's some specific ideas for that for the child. You know, it's a generic example there, but having a kind of quick reminding document like that it is often really helpful. So, thinking about the whole workshop that you've done now, do you have some ideas now how to respond to your child's behaviour? Really important to consider that question in terms of those green strategies from the previous presentations. Thinking about those changes to the environment that can better meet a child's needs, or approaches and ways of working and the interpersonal environment as well. Plus, what we do need is a well thought out safety plan to ensure that any reactive strategies that are necessary are going to be helpful to our child. So that's the end of the workshop. Thank you so much for listening. It would be good to get together again soon in the future when things are a little bit different. But thank you so much for your time, and do feel free to contact the team if that would be helpful. Thank you.